Hi team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. This is Ukraine War News Update. First part for the 24th of April 2024. Lots to report on today, mainly in my next videos actually. My military aid video is going to be pretty sizable. Senate has voted through that aid bill. Everyone will already know that, but it tells us quite a lot actually, because it was a resounding success in terms of more people voted for that than the previous iteration that went through the Senate. So that is really good, and it sends a message to not only Putin and Ukraine, it actually sends a message to Trump and MAGA Republicans. It's a really interesting dynamic developing in American politics, and when we look forward to what's going to happen with continued aid for Ukraine, then I think that's important. We'll also talk about the aid package a little bit itself. Right, okay. Let's now do hits and losses. All the usual caveats apply to this claim from the Ukrainian General Staff that we look at every day. Here we have, and the caveats can be found in the description to my video below. Here we have 880 personnel lost, which is a fairly high number. Well, really, goodness me, like I keep saying, a year and a half ago, if I said 880, it'd be like a massive number. And the record was sort of 1,000 at the time, and now we've seen 1,380. I think is the highest number, and the average, it seems, for this localized time period is around 800 odd. Right, tanks, 1 tank, so that's obviously less than we've seen. 12 armored personnel vehicles, again less. 43 artillery systems is a big number. There were some claims yesterday that Ukraine are aiming for artillery systems again. We're seeing a lot of HIMARS being used. I don't know if they're being used on artillery systems, but it could be that that is an explicit objective for the Ukrainians, like we saw in the counteroffensive, or it could just be a bit of an anomalous day. 2 multiple launch rocket systems, 2 anti-aircraft warfare systems, 47 vehicles and fuel tanks, and 8 pieces of special equipment. So a fairly heavy day in some categories for the Russians there, in other ones less so. We're going to look at 2 days worth of Andrew Perpetua's statistics, because his list for yesterday, list for the day before didn't come out until after I did my video. So we'll start with that one and then move on to yesterday's stats. Here you can see about a 2.5, 3-to-1 ratio Russian to Ukrainian losses, which is good. Exactly what Ukraine could do with even more than that, to be perfectly honest. What value losses do the Ukrainians have to begin with? Right, okay, a Strela 10 short-range air defense system. They've lost both sides have lost a lot of Strela 10s. They seem to be a bit of a mainstay in terms of Soviet-era short-range air defense systems. You can add an M777 AHS Crab, so that's a self-propelled howitzer provided by the Polish there. A couple of T-64s, a few BMPs, a few APCs and MRAPs. Interesting that they've got the Kozak 7 there. We're going to look at Kozaks in the military aid segment, because the Ukrainians are now making them in half-decent quantities and giving them to their own armed forces, obviously. So that's good news for the Ukrainians in that respect. And then general civilian vehicles. So nothing too costly there. Let's look at the Russian losses of a Buk air defense system, an electronic warfare system as well, 240mm self-propelled mortar, some tanks there, range of tanks, range of BMPs, range of armored personnel carriers and trucks and civilian vehicles, and some golf carts as well. So just a whole mass of equipment. No real difference between the sorts of things that have been lost on either side. I will note that there is, I think, when you're looking at the Ukrainian losses, ones that have been completely destroyed, I think the Russians have had a heavier issue there with what's been completely destroyed. So the air defense system for the Ukrainians is damaged by a Lancer. Lancers can be quite variable with what damage they do, whereas the Buk was destroyed. So these sort of differences can be quite important. Again, it's worth noting how much work the Lancer is doing at the moment for the Russians. There's been a real uptick in the use of Lancets. They've obviously made a whole bunch more of them. So I think that's a good day for the Ukrainians 2 days ago. Then when we look at the loss stats from yesterday, it's approaching parity. It's probably 1.5, just over 1-to-1 ratio Russian to Ukrainian losses. So the ratio is not nearly as good. But if you look down the Ukrainian losses, there's only 3 destroyed and 1 abandoned. The rest are damaged. When you look down the Russian losses, there's a lot more destroyed and abandoned. So that is something to be positive about when looking at these figures for the Ukrainian, from the Ukrainian point of view. Then we'll look at the Ukrainian losses in terms of value. First thing to note is that most of these appear to be coming from a Russian, probably a single video of night vision drone attack. So that's a montage. That's probably why you've got a heavy load of Ukrainian losses today. It's just coming from one video, and that has probably taken place over those losses have taken place over some longer time period than just yesterday. But that's can be said for the Russian losses often as well. So anyway, the Ukrainian losses here, just nothing too valuable. Tanks, BMPs, trucks, civilians, and some unknown vehicles so damaged you don't even know what they are, or the resolution was so poor. And night vision often is harder to tell what the things are that is being targeted, because it's all thermal imagery generally. So although that's quite a lot of stuff, there's nothing there that's particularly high value at all. In fact, that's probably the lowest value set of things I've seen for a long time. The Russians, an air defense system, a Tunguska, short range, I think, air defense system. There's some command and control vehicles. That's their high value. A radar system, 9S32M1, taken out by Gimlers. That could well be that S400 that we saw hit, and I'm still not 100% convinced that wasn't a decoy. I don't think you can tell particularly well with the resolution, but certainly nothing cooked off there. But it was a radar, not the launcher itself. So you wouldn't expect cooking off of the of any kind of weaponry on board, but fuel and electronics. I think as well, because the tungsten, I presume they were filled with tungsten. The Gimlers missiles that hit by that S400 didn't hit on it. They hit a little bit further back, so is probably a much greater chance of that stuff getting absolutely raked with tungsten ball bearings or fragments, and you wouldn't necessarily see that thing blow up. And then you could think, well, the resolution's poor, that just looks like it could be a decoy, but actually you wouldn't expect anything else from that kind of strike. Anyway, I'm still kind of umming and ahhing over it, but if that is one, then 2 command and control vehicles and a radar are taken out with those Gimlet strikes. Then we've got surveillance and comms equipment. We've got a couple of multiple launch rocket systems in the artillery section, tanks, T-72s, AT and T-62, infantry fighting vehicles, all the usual ones there, APCs, trucks, a lot of trucks. They are losing a lot of trucks. Someone was saying in the comments yesterday on one of my videos that he's been tracking the truck losses, and the Russians have just been losing some huge numbers of trucks recently. They are going to be hurting in terms of logistics. ATVs and civilian vehicles also taken out. We're starting to get things like motorcycles, desert crosses, these golf carts, ATVs as well, like quads. The Russians are using smaller and smaller bits of kit, and indeed, they're using them more because we're starting to see footage of them, but also them focusing on protecting their own motorbikes. So motorbikes with various drone protection additions to the back of them. I'm not laughing at that. It's just if I was due to be driving on a motorcycle in a war zone, I'd be building a cope cage around it as well. So yeah, it's a sign of what kind of war this is at the moment. Right, we're going to go to Daniele from Turkey, who I've interviewed a number of times. He's done another analysis of first-person view drone usage. He's written an article. Go and check it out on Turchny. He's summarized the article in a really useful thread. So we're going to look at that again. Or not again. I've not looked at this one, but we're going to look at his analyses again. Right, the fall of Avdiivka on the 17th of February 2024, so that's over a month ago now, is one of the more sobering junctures of the Ukrainian-Russian war. This article intends not to investigate the circumstances which led to the fall of Avdiivka, but will try to understand the situation the armed forces of Ukraine faced there. To explore the progression of FPV drone usage and its impact on the conflict, it's important to understand that the data analysed within this article is based on the geolocated and verified attacks recorded by operators and released in either edited or unedited versions on Telegram channels. The strikes recorded in this database, despite having been verified and geolocated with extreme care, represent only a portion of the total attacks. It's worth noting the one caveat I always have is the potential for a selection bias. So you're not 100% sure whether the Russians are not providing as much online footage as the Ukrainians, or vice versa. One side may provide more, one side may select more successful ones than unsuccessful ones and put them out, or different versions of whether what we see online is a fair representation of everything that is taking place. So can we take that and extrapolate it? Anyway, the idea from speaking to Daniele and the others is that the Russians generally put everything out that they can, is a thought there, and they often put out stuff you're like, you really shouldn't put that out. They often put out stuff of them, like the other day, destroying their own vehicles or hitting the wrong thing, and so there are claims that actually everything the Russians have they put out. So uncertainty regarding data arises from various factors, one of which is the time constraints associated with editing and distributing each strike. However, by analysing the observed data over an extended period, it is possible to identify trends crucial to understanding this new weapon system and its usage. So the other thing to remember is that if the Russians are not very good at doing something, or they don't have enough time to edit, or I don't know, whatever the thing the Russians do or don't do, if that's constant in that they do or don't do that over time, then the trends are still relevant. So it's only if they change their behavior in the way that they do their data collection and presentation, as in putting it onto social media. So what I mean by that is this big difference here is either a difference because of some issue they have, or a total change in their behavior and how they deal with social media. Now, without any evidence to suggest that, there's a more plausible explanation for this dipping here. But anyway, we'll come on to that. So this is the first data, the first chart, total first-person view strikes. So these are only the ones that are loitering munitions that are hitting people, positions, trenches, buildings, vehicles. Total FPV strikes on infantry per month. So this is on the infantry only. And we can see that the Russians and the Ukrainians, well, the Russians started catching up with the Ukrainians, but the data was pretty poor back here. But there was fairly much a almost like for like until this year. So January, the Ukrainians started moving ahead. And I think this is because they just started having more and more FPV drones, as there was a real ramping up of production, of procurement from abroad, and of charities working. People like ourselves, myself, Professor Gerdes, Greg Terry, Rick the Ukrainian, have provided 30 odd drones to the troops there. So that's just one unit, one set of people doing that. And that's been picking up. And so you start to see more and more. And then now it's got to crazy levels. And that's also in line with what the Ukrainian government is saying, that we are planning on making 1 million drones a year. Well, if they're planning on doing that, and they appear to be on track for doing that, then you're going to see a big uptick in drone usage by the Ukrainians on the Russians. Now, a big dip here is interesting for the Russians. So the question is, what explains that? Is that a behavioral change in uploading, not deciding not to upload stuff? They surely be selling their successes. So I doubt that's the case. It would be completely counterproductive for their PR game. So it's more likely that there just aren't so many Ukrainian troops near the front line. They're changing. Ukrainians are protecting themselves better. Russians are not getting as many drones. We can look at what those reasons might be. Okay, this, however, changed notably after December 2023, which marked a turning point for the usage of FPV drones in infantry operations. Since then, Ukrainian forces have continued to conduct more strikes than their Russian counterparts. The highest level of usage thus far on Russia has occurred on January 2024, with a steady decline observed. So the Russians' highest one in January, 629. That is now about half of what the highest Ukrainian usage was on infantry, and now the Russians are operating at about a quarter of what the Ukrainians are. So then we have strikes on vehicles, and we see that Ukraine has got a massive advantage here. And the main reason for this is that the Russians just use more vehicles because they're attacking. The Ukrainians have learnt to keep their vehicles further back. They are not attacking. So at the beginning of the counteroffensive, of course, the Ukrainians would have lost more vehicles. That would have been back before this data started, sort of May, June, July time. And then, they lost a bunch of equipment, but it wasn't so much the FPV strikes. Actually, it was to artillery, ATGMs, helicopters, etc., etc. But there is a sort of selection bias here, but it's just that the Ukrainians don't have as many vehicles as the Russians. Russians have lots of vehicles, or have had lots of vehicles, and are using them freely and throwing them directly into the path of FPV drones. And so you see a much bigger loss for the Russians in terms of vehicles here. So the situation regarding infantry strikes has, if it's seen a significant shift, the situation regarding vehicle strikes has changed similarly. A significant increase in FPV drone strikes on vehicles was observed, with Ukrainian forces striking 229, 311, 353, and 536 more vehicles each month from December to March respectively, reaching an astonishing maximum with 639 hits on vehicles in March alone. Russian forces have not been able to match Ukraine in its number of vehicle strikes per month. Both Russia and Ukraine's strategies can be observed in the daily graphs of vehicle strikes, in which Russia maintains similar results and records a small but increasing gap for Ukraine. Overall, Ukraine continues to use FPV drones as an effective weapon to attire or trick Russian resources, saving Ukraine's precious artillery shells in the process for more critical fire missions. And that's interesting. It's the need to use FPV drones because they don't have those artillery shells. And then we look at BMPs destroyed, damaged, or captured per month. So when we look at the general staff figures, or here it will be the Tochny figures from what they see. So the Andrew Perpetua figures, this is basically what these this chart is. So two particularly active areas for FPV drone activity will be considered for analysis: Avdiivka and Chasiv Yar. These locations serve as notable examples of the increasing usage of FPV drones on the Ukrainian battlefield at present. The prevalence of FPV strikes in these locations, so where we had high blue bars previously on the histogram, the previous blue ones were because that was the number of strikes. Now we've got big red ones because these represent the number of losses. The visually confirmed losses of Russian BMPs here. So the prevalence of FPV strikes in these locations may also suggest that electronic warfare has been less effective or less extensively deployed. A trend becomes evident upon analysing the increasing losses of Russian BMPs registered since December 2023, supported by video evidence, satellite imagery, and geolocation data provided by Andrew Perpetua and his team. The graph above shows the total loss of BMPs, either destroyed, captured, or damaged by any means. So remember, this isn't just FPV drones. These are any loss of these vehicles, but it tracks. The point is, when you're looking at data, you want to know whether it coheres or not with what you already have or other data points. Do other data points disconfirm what you have? I mean, you can talk about epistemology in philosophy here, which is like the coherence theory of truth. Truths are that which cohere with other known truths or theories or whatever. So here, these data points are all mutually coherent. The graph above shows the total loss of BMPs, either destroyed, captured, or damaged by any means. It is apparent from the data that Russian operations escalated, leading to a force more exposed to several threats, including FPV drones. The use of FPV drones in attacking positions, so these are attacks on positions, which was worrying. So the Russians had an advantage here. The Russians were attacking sort of trenches, and I think that does that refer to buildings as well, trenches, buildings, dugouts, all those kind of things. The Russians were using them more than the Ukrainians up until that, and quite considerably more as well. And that was I remember back in January, this was being noted by the team, and they're like, oh, this is a worry. And then since then, the Ukrainians have realized that and taken that on board and are using them not only to hit vehicles and troops out in the open, but also to hit dugouts, trenches, and buildings, to the point where they've now absolutely shot past the Russian usage. The graph illustrates, so it significantly changed the ground situation. The graph illustrates the data collected and verified through geolocation and analysis of open source videos. From January to February 2024, Russia increased the number of its FPV drone attacks on Ukrainian positions. This strategy was particularly effective in denying the defenders the ability to hold their positions, especially during urban fighting in both Mariinka and later in Avdiivka. As demonstrated in a previous article. However, Ukrainian forces quickly responded and achieved a certain level of parity in February. Remarkable in this regard is the number of strikes registered in March, with Ukraine recording 1,574 strikes against Russian positions, while Russia maintained a high level of strikes, 903 in total. Now, speculation from me. This is going to be because they had to do this, because they would normally do that with artillery and they had a lack of artillery ammunition. So remember, the Russians would have a 10-1 artillery advantage at the moment. So where the Ukrainians have the advantage here in striking positions now with drones, the Russians will definitely have an advantage with MLRS and artillery. So don't forget that. This is only first-person view drones. The Ukrainians would have had to do this. They had no other option. What I would like to see going forward is, with the artillery ammunition coming online soon and big aid packages forthcoming, I would love to see this remain, but together with artillery. Because actually drones have a particular advantage being used to hit buildings. They can go through windows. They can be really, really effective. They have some pretty big munitions on board now. I've seen buildings fall down because of drone strikes where drones have gone in through windows. So anyway, remarkable amount of hits on these buildings. So as mentioned, remarkable in this regard is the number of strikes registered in March, with Ukraine recording 1,574 strikes on Russians. Russia maintained a high level of strikes of 903 in total. So the Russians had their highest number, but it was only just above what they previously had, where the Ukrainians absolutely shot through their previous figure. Right. In an analysis of strikes on positions, it is important to understand where most of the Russian FPV drones have occurred. Overall, 70.5% of all the strikes have targeted trenches. As previously analysed, the precision of FPV drone strikes poses a significant threat to defensive lines, especially when exposed to unchallenged aerial reconnaissance performed by surveillance drones using thermal vision. Houses are the second most struck target and become even more vulnerable when Russian ground forces move their offensive operations into towns. So trenches overwhelmingly struck, but then houses as well, bunkers next, and buildings after that. Then you get sort of basements, tree lines, and foxholes. And then in the situation on the ground, to gain a clear understanding of the effective use of FPV drones from the Ukrainian side, it's crucial to have a clear picture of the offensive maneuvers on the opposing side. And Avdiivka is one of the areas where the highest concentration of FPV strikes has been recorded and geolocated. The map below is based on several open source intelligence analyses, in addition to data compiled and corroborated by researchers such as Poulet Volant, who has posted near daily updates of the ground operations within the most active areas of the front line. When we superimpose the map created by Poulet and the data of Ukrainian FPV drones represented by blue stars, we can get a better understanding of the importance of the directions where Russian forces attempted to push the Ukrainian lines forward: the Stepova-Berditsy direction and the Lastochkerne or Livka direction. Going south, there are two more vectors from Tonyenka and lastly towards Pervomaisky in the defense of Avdiivka's Western areas. So all of these, I mean, the amount of data is incredible, and the fact that these guys have analysed it so carefully is brilliant. The use of FPV drones has been of particular intensity along attack routes and main supply routes, as well as tree line positions away from roads where troops were on rotation and reconstituting. This, combined with relentless strikes on the Russian rear areas, has contributed to blocking and delaying Russian advances. Consequently, this has also allowed Ukrainian troops to reorganise their defensive lines, a comparatively flat terrain with inherent absence of cover, and the Russian troops need to use their numerically superior advantages to retain momentum, have made it easier for Ukrainian FPV drones to inflict severe casualties. This has forced the Russians to intensify aerial bombing campaigns to destroy or deny AFU defenders their positions. So the Russians relying on aerial bombardments, which, those are hugely problematic for the Ukrainians. That's a whole other problem. Technological development, so night vision and thermal rays. This is supremely important, by the way, this one, because this was a recognised advantage that the Russians had, and it was a huge advantage. And to see that advantage switched is brilliant. Okay, so this constitutes a significant development, and another area where we've seen significant changes have occurred in night vision usage in FPV drones. So significant development, and as the collected data shows, Russian FPV drones with night vision capabilities have had considerable success since their introduction in November 2023, with no apparent recorded response from Ukrainian forces. Significant changes occurred over the last 3 months, marked by exponential growth in March 2024. Such rapid expansion may be attributed partly to drone operators reporting their nighttime operations more frequently, although this alone cannot fully justify the surge recorded. One of the primary challenges in deploying night vision devices is the cost of optical components, often a thermal sensor. While a basic FPV drone typically costs $300 to $400, incorporating a more sophisticated thermal sensor can significantly escalate the price to over $1,000. The complexity of integrating a thermal sensor into such a confined and weight-constrained device contributes to the increased cost. The microbolometer's remarkable sensitivity and precision render it indispensable in thermal imaging technology, and often represent the most critical and expensive component. Their cost and the difficulties involved in acquiring them pose a real bottleneck in thermal FPV drones. However, this challenge has been addressed by Ukrainian volunteer groups such as Wild Hornet, who have adopted general-purpose infrared bolometers, which are widely available and are an order of magnitude cheaper than specialized microbolometers. Infrared cameras covering a broader range of applications offer models of various types of complexity, resulting in a broader spectrum of financial expenses. For basic low-light functionality, an effective infrared camera is more affordable, especially when intended for use on loitering munitions. FPV drone advances in on-purpose warheads. One of the most significant progress in the development and specialization of FPV drones is the production and use of dedicated warheads. The evolution of FPV drones has been propelled by the need to innovate swiftly, utilizing relatively scarce resources in real-time adaptability to battlefield demands. Such an effort has been accelerated, as mentioned earlier, by the dire situation of the AFU's artillery ammunition resource to date. Ukraine has been on the forefront of developing advanced armor-piercing ammunition for FPV drones, as reported by Defense UA. The country's innovative approach to drone warfare has resulted in the creation of highly effective explosively formed penetrator shells, or EFP shells, capable of piercing armoured targets. This development represents a significant leap forward in the realm of anti-armour warfare, empowering drones to engage armoured vehicles with unprecedented effectiveness. An analysis of the visual evidence is summarised by the graph below, where the data on FPV strikes on tanks about total hits, damage, destroyed and abandoned vehicles is reported. Of the 249 visually identified strikes on tanks, 83% were classified as vehicles being damaged, 13% of the strikes were classified as destroyed vehicles, and the remaining abandoned or captured. It's worth noting that this trend is similar to the data regarding overall FPV drone usage, with a similar drop noted in December 2023. So I wonder whether the percentage of destroyed is going up. I don't know if it is particularly. I don't know whether that data set gives us a clear picture of whether drones are able to destroy more tanks than they used to be able to. Anyway, an even more dramatic toll on Russian vehicles is observed in the data from FPV strikes on all BMP type, so infantry fighting vehicles, where a total of 727 visually confirmed strikes were recorded. Among these, 57% of said strikes resulted in clear vehicle loss due to damage, 27% due to the destruction of the vehicle, and the remaining strikes led to abandonment or capture of the vehicle in question. The increasing number of Russian IFVs destroyed is indicative of a continuation of an offensive doctrine adopted by the Russian forces in the early stage of the new year. So, yeah, I don't know percentage-wise whether drones are becoming more effective at taking out IFVs. I mean, that's a pretty good percentage there, but then you could say the same for these two back in September and October. What you can say is that the Ukrainians are taking out way more IFVs than they ever have done before, or at least since this in this data set. I mean, incredible. The integration of FPV drones with advanced warheads represents a paradigmatic shift. So a shift in paradigm in modern warfare, offering military forces unprecedented capabilities on the battlefield. As this technology continues to evolve, it is likely to play an increasingly prominent role in shaping the outcome of conflicts around the world. So actually what you might be able to tell is not so much the percentage that are destroyed, but just the higher number of damaged, destroyed vehicles could be that actually they are just getting penetrated more by those warheads, and the same can be said for tanks. So actually it's not looking at those that are destroyed over damage, but it's just generally how many are damaged or destroyed compared to previously. It's likely to play an increasingly prominent role in shaping the outcome of conflicts around the world, from precision strikes against armoured vehicles to the decimating of enemy infantry formations. At a relatively low cost, FPV drones are holding an increasingly significant share in the panorama of warfare in the 21st century. Really good stuff there. I know that was a long thread to go through, but I think it's really important, and it also shows the huge success that the Ukrainians are having, and in changing areas where they were previously not having an advantage. So the night vision strikes per month with FPVs, the strikes on positions, as you can see here, they have turned it around. Really good stuff. Right, moving on to distant strikes. Pretty important stuff happened last night. So Odessa was hit, I think, yesterday and today. It has been under an awful lot of missile and drone pressure over the last few weeks, particularly. Rescuers are eliminating the consequences of an attack by the invaders, it says here, on Odessa. So lots of emergency workers working in Odessa due to strikes there. Also, Kharkiv, Russia launches a missile attack there. I think an S-300 took out or damaged 3 buildings, or 4 buildings actually, residential buildings, in the early hours of this morning. So a few people injured there. Yeah, here we have it. Russian missile attack on Kharkiv, injured 7 people. Russian troops hit Kharkiv with an S-300 missile, damaged 3 residential buildings, 2 office buildings, and gas pipelines. In Odessa, the attack damaged about 30 houses and a power grid. So that's been happening overnight in Ukraine. On the other hand, yesterday there were this is this morning actually, a number of explosions during the night between occupied Mariupol and Berdyansk. So there have been strikes there. It could be Storm Shadow strikes. Who knows? Could even be ATACMS. Don't know anything about that other than in Berdyansk they heard 4 or 5 blasts, while in Mariupol apparently there were 10 or more. So these could be significant strikes on those two places. In Novofedorivka and Crimea yesterday, there was something that was burning a lot. Looks like very black smoke, so it could be something to do with oil. So somewhere in Crimea was hit yesterday. Then there were significant strikes last night on an oil refinery or 2. One's an old depot. This footage is from Smolensk region, where the government confirmed fires at both oil and energy facilities. One of them is a really big fire. The refinery burning is in Yartsev in Smolensk Oblast. Locals report hearing 4 explosions. Russia says it shot down 8 drones overnight, 3 in Kursk, 2 in Belgorod and Voronezh regions, and 1 in Smolensk. Well, yeah, here last night I told you about the drones in Voronezh region. Says Tim White, and authorities saying debris fell near a house, but there was a column of smoke. Now this video has appeared claiming another oil facility has been hit there too. Actually, I think this is the one in Smolensk. But anyway, the big fire to the right is significant, but there's also a fire just growing in those or just above those as it pans to the left here. There is another fire or explosion that's just taken place, something just there. You can just see the flames poking up over the top. So, and then in Belgrade, there's an explosion and a huge fire. I don't know whether that's like a grass fire that's taken place as a result, or anyway. So that was Belgrade. In Kursk region, fire alarms were also active last night. So there were some really significant strikes on Russia that we're hearing about today. So that oil depot was the one in Yartsevo in Smolensk. I think there's an oil depot. I don't know about refinery. There are various claims. These are the firm's images. So this is NASA's satellites that pick up big fires, originally designed to pick up wildfires, are now being used to work out what's been struck in this war. So there's some really significant fires taking place in a couple of areas in Smolensk. And then Max 23 just has this. Saying 2 oxygen units are shut down in another Lipetsk metallurgical plant. So this is in the Lipetsk Oblast. After a drone attack, oxygen station building destroyed. At night, 2 drones crashed into the building of the NLMK oxygen station. Building was partially destroyed. 2 oxygen units of the plant were stopped. Astra sources in the emergency services of the Lipetsk region reported. No casualties are known. The main task of oxygen stations in metallurgical plants is to provide production with the necessary amount of compressed air. So that means metal working will be hindered, and one would presume that's to do with the construction, the manufacture of military equipment. So some significant strikes, and I think you're going to see just more of that. I think you're going to get a ramping up of drones as the drone manufacturing capacity indigenously in Ukraine is increased, and we're going to see more of this happening. But also, if it's correct that we're going to see ATACMS, the 300 kilometers ATACMS, then you are, and Storm Shadows on the way as well, then you are going to see just a whole variety of strikes taking place from now on. So moving on to other bits and pieces. As Putin's barbaric hellscape becomes even more hellish and more barbaric, what could possibly make widespread flooding even worse? Yep, radioactive flooding. Yeah, baby, says Jay in Kiev. Now, of course, I wouldn't be quite so... I think this is a huge shame. You know, this is a great environmental disaster, but of course, Russia will be unable to throw as many resources into A, stopping this from happening in the first place, B, clearing it up after, and C, stopping it happening again, etc., etc. They are piling so much money into this war that stuff like this is exacerbated. So the Kurgan region is at risk. So I've reported all these floods taking place in several regions, is at risk of radioactive contamination of water due to the flooding of old uranium mines. Sergei Shoigu has promised to bomb Ukraine more after the US military aid approval. This is a worry that there might be some kind of revenge taking place. Quote, Washington intends to allocate nearly $61 billion to the Kyiv regime to prevent the collapse of Ukraine's armed forces. In proportion to the threats proposed by the United States and its allies, we will continue to improve the composition and structure of the armed forces, increase the production of the most popular weapons and military equipment. We will increase the intensity of strikes against logistics centers and storage bases of Western weapons, Shoigu said at the Defense Ministry Board meeting. Now, my opinion of this is that if Russia could be doing more, they would be doing more. They aren't going to be like half-arsing it in a war now. They need this war to be concluded. And I think they are throwing everything they can at the front lines. And I think they are they've ramped up their production capacity. The only way they can get more out of what they're doing now, in my opinion, is to get more from China. So Shoigu could be telling the truth if he can be assured a ramping up of production that comes from China that then allows them to throw more bombs and munitions into Ukraine. Otherwise, I think that's probably largely empty rhetoric. Now, his underling... Well, the Deputy Defence Minister in charge of military housing, who owns multiple European residences and wears luxury goods, has been arrested for taking bribes. The interesting thing about this, says Dara Masuko, is why now and who did he irritate? So corruption at this level is not unique to the MOD. The residences and spending habits of many of these individuals have been documented over the past years. Here's Ivanov, and this is a Medusa article on him previously. Was Ivanov dipping into the actual MOD till instead of oligarch shell companies like the others? Did he cross some informal boundary he was not supposed to cross, or made some enemies with family construction ties in the MOD? Who would it be? Bit of confusion there with the English. Now, PS01 says a couple of rumours about Ivanov's arrest. One, 3 other people were arrested together with him. One of them is this chap who's already in court. 2, the arrest took place during a high-level meeting. 3, Putin wants to out Shoigu, so he is clearing the MOD from Shoigu's associates. I can't speak to the accuracy of that. And 4, the media that broke the news belongs to Putin's banker, Kovalchuk. Always worth knowing who's actually promoting or shout about these stories first. Who got hold of it? This is a big inside job type thing. Another person involved in the Timur Ivanov case has been arrested. Sergei Borodin, a defendant in the case of taking a bribe by the Deputy Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation, was sent to a pre-trial detention center for 2 months. This is serious stuff. I mean, you could have the Deputy Minister of Defense go down for an awful long time. Now, moving slightly sideways, Kadyrov's closest ally, a guy called Apti Alaudanov, who's from the Akhmat group, I think. So he is likely going to be the guy who takes over Chechnya if your man Kadyrov dies, or will be very much involved in it, because it could well be one of Kadyrov's family members. But Alaudanov will be there. He's recently appointed to a position in the Russian Defense Ministry, and he's telling Russian propagandist Skabieva that Russia will wage a war for the rest of the decade and intends to destroy NATO. Quote, Russia will win in this special military operation and on all other battlefields. Yes, we will have to work hard until 2029 or 2030, but I can assure you that the outcome of this special military operation will be that the NATO bloc will cease to exist in the format in which it exists today. Most of those states who today are running after America like mutts will kneel down and swear an oath to Russia, asking to be accepted into our coalition. This is a sort of rhetoric that needs to be shown to people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, to say, what do you say about this? Because if you're putting America first, these guys are trying to do in America. I mean, literally telling you they are your enemies and they're going to, etc., etc. It just frustrates me. Right, according to Mikhailo Podolyak, Valery Zaluzhny, the former commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, will begin his official activities as ambassador to the UK in the coming weeks. And then finally, just another plane issue. The aviation industry in Russia is struggling. Passengers on a flight from Yakutia had a lucky escape. 2 landing wheel tires disintegrated on landing at Oleg Minsk Airport. There were 25 people on board the AN-24 Aero Airlines plane. It's not going to be long until something horrific happens, I'm sure. Anyway, that's a long one for me. Thank you for watching. It was due to that FPV drone analysis, which I think is super important. It's great to get an understanding of what's going on there. Hopefully you found that interesting and useful. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon.